He thought it was just another night at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, where billionaires gave orders and waitresses obeyed. But when David Richmond, a smug financial tycoon, mocked a young black waitress by asking for a little financial advice with his water, the entire room expected her to shrink in silence. Instead, her response froze the air. Within seconds, the laughter died, and a billionaire's world began to unravel. Because what David didn't know was that the woman he tried to humiliate wasn't just another server. She was a storm waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But first, please make sure to subscribe the channel and comment below from which city you are watching this video. At the heart of Manhattan, the Chateau Lawrence stood as a shrine to wealth and power, a place where the rich came to be worshipped. Among them was David Richmond, a billionaire whose arrogance filled the marble halls as easily as the sound of champagne being poured. He didn't just dine there, he owned every room he entered. When he lazily asked the waitress for financial advice, along with that water, the staff laughed nervously, used to his cruelty disguised as charm. But Kesha Williams, 28, didn't laugh. Her hand paused mid-pour, eyes steady, voice calm. Then, with the precision of a Wall Street analyst, she delivered an investment breakdown that silenced an entire restaurant. For a moment, David's smirk faltered. The executives at his table shifted, unsure whether to laugh or applaud. Who was this woman who spoke like she'd spent her life commanding boardrooms instead of serving drinks? As Kesha walked away, the billionaire found himself doing something unusual, watching her. There was something unnerving in her calm, something that didn't fit the uniform she wore. Her eyes carried storms, the kind forged through survival, injustice, and quiet rebellion. By the time his water glass was full, David Richmond's curiosity had turned into obsession. He ordered his assistant to find out everything about her, who she was, where she came from, and how a waitress could know the language of markets better than his own analysts. He didn't realize then that this single act of arrogance had already set a trap. The moment he underestimated her was the moment his empire began to crumble. For the first time in his privileged life, David Richmond couldn't stop thinking about a waitress. He had built a multi-billion-dollar empire on reading people, predicting markets, and exploiting weakness, but Kesha Williams didn't fit into any of his familiar categories. She was an anomaly, and he hated anomalies. 3 days later, a detailed background report landed on his desk. It described a woman with a degree from a second-rate college, no criminal record, no financial history worth noting, no connections to Wall Street. On paper, she was nobody. But that only deepened his frustration. No one learns to talk like that from community college, he muttered. So David began showing up at Chateau Lawrence again and again, always asking for the same waitress. Every encounter was a new test, each question a dagger meant to pierce the mystery surrounding her. And every time, Kesha met him with calm professionalism, her sharp intelligence hidden beneath a mask of composure. Then one evening, David went too far. He baited her with a question about Asian markets, information he knew she couldn't possibly have. When she gave an answer that was slightly off, he seized the moment, mocking her loudly in front of the guests. The laughter at nearby tables was salt on the wound. To everyone else, it looked like humiliation. But for Kesha, it was data. Every sneer, every insult, she was cataloging them, recording his arrogance as carefully as she once tracked stock volatility. What David didn't know was that Kesha wasn't just a waitress. She had once been one of Wall Street's brightest analysts, a quantitative genius who had built trading algorithms that made millions, until a corrupt supervisor framed her for insider trading to save himself. She lost her job, her savings, and her reputation. Now she was rebuilding, one quiet move at a time. When David ordered a private investigation into her life, Kesha already knew. She was 2 steps ahead. While he dug into her past, she was dissecting his present, sitting in a small cafe on the Lower East Side, laptop open, her old Goldman Sachs colleague Marcus by her side. Together, they combed through Richmond Investments records, uncovering suspicious trades and whispers of insider deals. The deeper they looked, the clearer it became. David Richmond wasn't just arrogant, he was corrupt. Each time he taunted her in the restaurant, Kesha smiled to herself. Every cruel word made her invisible armor stronger. By pretending to be humiliated, she had given him exactly what he needed to destroy himself, a false sense of power. While David's investigators saw a harmless waitress, Kesha was quietly building a case that could collapse his empire. Over coffee one night, Marcus asked, "You're really going to take him down, aren't you?" Kesha's eyes didn't waver. "He made me visible again for all the wrong reasons. Now it's my turn to make him visible for what he really is." And as David Richmond grew more obsessed, his empire was already beginning to rot from inside. The clock had started ticking. He just didn't know that the countdown to his downfall had already begun. 3 weeks after that first humiliating encounter at Chateau Lorraine, the trap finally closed. Inside the glass-walled conference room of Richmond Tower, David stood before a table of eager international investors. On the screen behind him glowed the crown jewel of his career, a $2.8 billion takeover of a promising medical technology firm. Cameras flashed, pens clicked, and David's voice carried the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. "This," he declared, "is the deal of the century." Then the door opened. Every head turned as Kesha Williams stepped into the room, no longer wearing a waitress uniform, but an elegant suit that radiated quiet power. She walked in like she belonged there. And she did. "Sorry to interrupt," she said calmly, placing a briefcase on the table. "But there's some information your investors deserve to see before they sign anything." David's world tilted. His mouth went dry as he recognized the woman he had mocked and humiliated. "What is this?" "Security," he barked. But Kesha continued, her voice unwavering. "My name is Kesha Williams, formerly Kesha Davidson, senior quantitative analyst at Goldman Sachs. The woman you've been investigating isn't who you think she is. While you were trying to dig up my past," she opened the briefcase, sliding out a thick folder of documents, "I was investigating you." She laid out evidence of insider trading, falsified reports, and secret communications with corporate insiders. Then, she pressed play on a recording, David's own voice echoing through the room. "Make sure they can't trace it back to our source at the SEC." The investors froze. David's face drained of color. Every eye in the room turned toward him, judgment sharp as glass. Kesha didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I've already sent copies of this evidence to the SEC, the FBI, and the Wall Street Journal. By tomorrow morning, the world will know who David Richmond really is." The king of finance stood motionless, watching his empire collapse in front of the very people who once worshipped him. The silence that followed was heavier than any courtroom verdict. David Richmond stood frozen, watching the empire he had built with greed and arrogance collapse piece by piece. Investors stormed out, calls flooded in from journalists, and the man who once ruled Wall Street now sat surrounded by the ruins of his own deceit. Kesha didn't gloat. She simply closed the folder, looked him in the eyes, and said, "You destroyed yourself, David. I just turned on the lights." By nightfall, Richmond Investments had imploded. The FBI raided his offices. The Wall Street Journal headline read, "The Waitress Who Exposed a $1 billion Fraud." 6 months later, the world looked very different. Kesha Williams sat behind a glass desk in her new Manhattan office, the skyline glittering like a reward earned through pain and perseverance. On her doorplate, Kesha Williams, founder and CEO, Financial Consulting Group. She had turned 3 weeks of humiliation into the greatest corporate takedown of the decade. Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, and BlackRock all fought to hire her. Universities called her a pioneer. Her story became a business case study titled The Richmond Syndrome, a warning about what happens when arrogance blinds power to hidden brilliance. Meanwhile, David Richmond, once untouchable, served a 15-year prison sentence for fraud and insider trading. His mansion was gone, his name disgraced, and the people who once bowed before him now crossed the street to avoid him. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through her window, Kesha smiled faintly at a framed photo on her desk, a candid snapshot of her serving David at Chateau Lorraine. A memory of where it all began. "True revenge," she murmured, "isn't destroying your enemies. It's succeeding in ways they never imagined." Her story became a legend, proof that intelligence and integrity will always outlast arrogance and privilege. And for everyone watching her story unfold, one haunting question remained. How many more Kesha Williams are waiting, underestimated, invisible, and ready to rewrite the rules?